This Veterans History Project interview is with Sergeant Major of the Army Dan Dailey, United States Army, retired, on October the 29th, 2024, at the Association of the United States Army in Arlington, Virginia. Sergeant Major Dailey, to begin, thank you for your many years of service to our nation and the Army and for meeting with us today. How many years did you serve in the Army, and at what rank and what position of responsibility did you retire?
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Mark, and I appreciate the opportunity to take part in this program, which I think is incredible for our nation and our country. So I joined the Army in 1989 in delayed entry program and retired after exactly 30 years. I joined as a young infantry soldier and served a career as an infantry soldier for 30 years.
Thank you. And could you please share with us a little bit more about your childhood, your parents' schools, and what led you to serve in the Army? And then if you would also, and this is a long question, why did you choose to enlist, and did you feel a call to serve?
Absolutely. So I grew up in a very small town in northeastern Pennsylvania, but a very patriotic town. It was a manufacturing town. It was actually the largest zinc producer in America back when it started, of which there was many individuals served during World War II. So I grew up around a culture of patriotism and honor and dignity and hard work and discipline. My father and mother both worked very hard. I came from very humble beginnings. My father didn't graduate high school. He joined the Army in order to serve his country and follow his brother's footsteps, who was serving in Vietnam at the time. Then got out after his first tour. He was a communications specialist and took a job as a telephone company worker and moved us to the small town close to where he was born from, called Palmerton, Pennsylvania. He married my mother. They were high school sweethearts, and we were raised in a way that my mom was very religious. She raised us very strict Catholic. My father was a hard worker, very disciplined, worked 2 jobs, but he always talked about service in the Army. He was one of those guys that said, gosh, I should have never got out. And he talked about his father's service in the Army and his brother's service in the Army. And then my mother talked about her father's service because both of my grandparents served in World War II and came home from the war. So we grew up as children understanding that service to our nation was important, hard work was important, and we watched our parents struggle, not necessarily in the fact that they were any different than the society we lived in at the time. They were just hard-working people from very humble beginnings who knew that working hard would give them a good way of life, and that's just the way they raised us. So I was inspired to serve at a very young age by them, and listening to the stories of people within the community, watching the patriotic views of the community I lived in, where they honored things like Veterans Day and the 4th of July. And those were very special times in a little small town community in northeastern Pennsylvania.
So with that proud legacy of service to the nation and serving in the Army, were there ever any thoughts about perhaps enlisting in another military service, such as the Navy or the Air Force?
Actually, yes. So, of course, I was very fond of the Army because I heard all the stories from my father and saw the pictures of my grandfather, who was a bombardier, my other grandfather, who was a tanker during World War II, and my oldest brother had already joined the Army prior to me serving. So it was kind of like it was a family legacy thing. I actually wanted to join the Coast Guard first. I thought I wanted to be out on the ocean and the water, from trips to Jersey Shore when I was a little kid. I just loved the ocean. I loved the environment. And at the time when I approached a Coast Guard recruiter, there was an 18-month wait to get into the Coast Guard. So shortly after high school, I was not destined for college because of the financial situation that my family was in. And I really wanted to go do something immediately. As a young kid, all I wanted to do was get out of that little town. And then later on, I spent my entire life trying to get back. So immediately after that, I realized, I want to join the Army because Coast Guard was just something to do different, exciting. My father would have supported any service that I wanted to join. But of course, I went to the Army recruiter and couldn't get in initially. I had a little stumble on that. Not because of any background or grades. I was doing good in school. I'd never been in trouble in my life. But my middle brother tried to join the service a year previously and was denied service because of a hearing disability. And I had the same thing, which is genetically passed down within our family. So I was denied entry into the service initially. I'm very, very crushed about it. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I was an 11th grader in high school at this time, and I got told that I couldn't serve. But there was a possibility of a medical waiver. Um, so I remember coming home from the MEP station, and I think, my brother and I felt as if we let our father down because he really wanted to see us serve in uniform. And fortunate enough, a few months later, with the help of my high school principal, who was a colonel in the United States Army Reserve and a Vietnam veteran who wrote a letter of recommendation for me, I received a waiver for my hearing and was allowed to enlist.
Thank you for sharing that with us, SMA. And what a great example of in your childhood of having a challenge and persevering and finding a way to overcome the challenge and to achieve your goals.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. And in high school, did you have any friends, any buddies that joined you in enlisting, or that were also thinking about enlisting? In high school years are very formative years, and learning about working in teams and having friends like in sports, that sort of thing. So any of your buddies also think about joining and perhaps accompany you?
Yeah, there was talk about it between my peers at school. I think I was the first one to actually jump into it because I signed up for the late entry program. I was only in 11th grade at that time. I was still a minor. My parents actually had to sign for me to join the Army. And there wasn't many people, I think, that did it that soon. So I knew in 11th grade that I was going to join the Army as soon as I graduated high school. But a few folks did follow me afterwards from my hometown. One that was a couple years behind me is still serving today.
And I see that as an opportunity to lead by example. You're showing the way, so to speak, for some of your high school classmates.
Well, I don't know.
Took a little courage.
I was an average kid, average height, played basketball, did well in school, but wasn't the top of my class. But I knew that the military was going to give me an opportunity that I probably would have otherwise not gotten. Of course, I would have worked hard. I had a job all through high school. We were taught that at a very young age, and disciplined with our finances and being morally correct from the moral compass that our mother instilled it to us at a very young age. But I knew that the military was going to give me an opportunity that I otherwise would not have been handed.
Thank you. And you mentioned that you enlisted for the infantry. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Why did the infantry? Did you have a choice there? And tell us a little bit about your basic training and initial training to become an infantry soldier, please.
Yep. So actually, I didn't want to join the infantry initially. I wanted to be an aviation mechanic. I had done mechanics with my father and my brother, who was previously joined the military, and he was a wheel mechanic in the Army. And I thought that I would join the Army, learn how to be an aviation mechanic, come out, finish my schooling, because that was one of the opportunities that was presented to me when I enlisted, was I was going to get a GI Bill, right? So, and unfortunately, I was not allowed to become an aviation mechanic because of my hearing disability. So I was presented a few other options, and of course, infantry was the most inspiring one to me. As soon as they said, "Hey, infantry's open," I said, "I want to be an infantry soldier."
Thank you. And would you tell us what then, going on to your infantry training and then your first assignment? What was your first assignment like in the Army?
Yeah, well, first basic training back then, Fort Benning, Georgia, now Fort Moore. I remember being a scared young 17-year-old boy at the time. I was still under 18 when I arrived to basic training a few days before my 18th birthday. It was a hot August day, and I remember getting off the bus and having the wonderful greeting by the drill sergeants, like many of us have experienced in the past. I was scared, just like any young boy joining the Army, a young man joining the service, and young lady. At that time, we were all males together at the infantry center, and I didn't know what was ahead of me. I had no idea. Of course, I had talked to my brother, who previously had served and had already gotten back out of the Army, and he had a much different experience because he was a wheel mechanic. But he did go to Fort Benning, Georgia for base training, and he did go to airborne school. So I had a little insight on what it was going to be like. I was very physically fit. I played basketball, high school sports all throughout my life. I ran every day. I was very active in sports and swimming and fishing and hunting and all those things. So I wasn't worried about that at all. Actually, I did very well physically. I guess I was just fear of the unknown. Shortly after I graduated basic training, I was shipped off to Germany, and I was excited because that's where my father was stationed back in the '60s, and he told us all the stories about how great it was to be overseas. And to that point, I had never been on an airplane in my life until I joined the army, the military. I mean, the farthest destinations I ever made was New Jersey for a week vacation during the summer. And going overseas was just intriguing to a young man who had spent his entire life in the northeastern part of the United States. So I was looking very much forward to it. But at the time, there was a conflict going on, and it was brewing very vigorously. It was called Desert Storm. So shortly after I arrived to Germany, I was stationed in Schweinfurt, Germany, signed to the 3rd Infantry Division. About just a few months after I arrived, I was shipped off to Desert Storm.
And could you describe for us a little bit about what that was like? You just right into your first unit, the 3rd Infantry Division, and then you're already deploying in service to our nation and moving to a conflict. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, again, a little bit apprehensive, but I remember I felt confident. Even though I was only in it a few times, I had phenomenal leaders with an immense amount of experience. My squad leaders, platoon sergeants, even the platoon leader, just incredible leaders. There was no fear of any of that. I think it was, again, just the unknown. I remember vividly, getting on an airplane from Germany and flying in to Saudi Arabia, landing at King Khalid military base, and then training out in the desert for several months with writing home and saying, there's literally nothing here but sand. I mean, it's just sand. And because we didn't deploy as a homogeneous unit, we deployed as platoons. Not my entire unit in Germany didn't deploy. So we were attached to units to be replacements after the first main tank battle that went through. So I spent a lot of time in the desert training. The ground war started, and as history presents itself, it was over very quickly. So I didn't make it very far forward to the front lines at that time. And then we came back, and then I obviously had to reintegrate and go back to Germany. And then several days later, after I returned to Germany, it was just back to being a soldier, going out to the field and training again.
And when you were initially deployed to the theater, did you go as, I think you said, as a platoon?
As a platoon.
And then your platoon was part of a company and a battalion.
Mm-hmm.
And were there training opportunities to prepare yourselves for the potential for conflict? Could you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we weren't assigned to a specific unit at the time. Third Army had what was called a replacement company set up at a camp outside KKMC, which was King Khalid Military City. Mm-hmm. And we went out every day and trained for trench warfare. I was an infantry soldier at that time, because we didn't know what the war was going to bring. So we were basically the replacements that were being ready to replace any losses that were taken during the first several days of the battle. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. and so our training kept proceeding until the ground war was over, and it was quickly ended, and then we kind of just waited around to fly back home.
Very good. And when you returned to Germany and then your unit reformed, could you tell us a little bit more then, how did your career progress then in that first assignment?
Yeah.
And any leadership opportunities that you had?
Absolutely. So originally I told you I stated I wanted to join the Army for several reasons. It was instilled in me as a young age that service to our nation was honorable, and it was a good thing to do, a good way to start your life. My brother had done that. He had gotten out of the Army a few years before I joined, my oldest brother, and it set him on a very good career path to success. He was a trained mechanic, got a job immediately after he got out of the service, and has done very well to this day as a result of his service and the training the military gave him. So I thought, I was going to do my tour, which is initially, I was a 2-year soldier. Back then, they offered a 2-year enlistment. And so my time quickly came up. I loved Germany. I loved the time I spent there. I loved training. I loved my unit. And I was inspired to continue to serve largely by one person. That was my squad leader. His name was Staff Sergeant Davis. He was an incredible leader. Strict, but very caring and compassionate. He was very critical about how we were trained and educated. He made sure that we were doing correspondence courses and furthering our education alongside our military training, and he invested time in us. So when that first tour, I remember spending a lot of time in the field that first 2 years. Even after I came back from Desert Storm, we went right back out to train. There was other things brewing in the world at that time, Kosovo and Bosnia. And we didn't know what the result of the effects of Desert Storm were going to be at that time. So we spent a lot of time training in the field. And I spent a lot of time forming relationships with my new Army family. And then it was time to go home because that was a 2-year enlistment. So my enlistment was up. And I remember the day vividly that I was sitting in the battalion quad, and my squad leader came out with a retention card because back then we didn't have computers or cell phones or internet. And he said, Specialist Dailey, you're due to reenlist. And he goes, what do you think about staying in the Army? And I said, well, I hadn't thought about it. I didn't hate the Army. I had no disdain. I just thought I did what I was supposed to do. Serve my country, get a better start at life, and go home and pursue my dreams of becoming an aeronautical aviation mechanic and maybe an engineer in the future. And he looked at me and said, hey, we're going to send you to PLDC at that time. That was Primary Leadership Development course. He said, let's see how you do. And then come back and make a decision. So I was promoted very fast to specialist. Within that 2 years, I got my expert infantryman's badge. I remember I was only one of just a handful in the battalion that got it. So I went to PLDC that next month, and I was the Distinguished Honor Grad. I came home. I remember calling my father and saying, Dad, I think I'm going to reenlist and do this for a little bit while longer. So within, I think, the same week, I went to the reenlistment NCO and signed up for another 3 years.
What a terrific example. What did your father say when you told me you were thinking about reenlisting?
He was excited. He told us stories as a young child that he wished he would have never got out. Incredible stories about how he served in Germany and had opportunities that he would have otherwise not had. I mean, his career up to that point, where he became very successful until the day he passed, he was the superintendent of a telephone company, was offered to him because he was a communications specialist in the Army. He was so proud of the fact that I was going to stay in. And although I had a legacy of service of family members throughout the history of our family tree, I was the only one that stayed. They all were kind of called to service because of war or because of patriotism, but I was the only person that was going to stay in the Army. He was pretty proud of that.
Very good. Thank you for sharing. And then what happened next? I'm thinking there would have been, you reenlisted and then probably a new assignment and going somewhere else.
Yeah.
Could you share that with us, please?
I extended in Germany for another year. I was having a great time. I loved the unit. I got promoted to sergeant. Now I'm a team leader. And so my third year, then I received orders to PCS to Fort Riley, Kansas. So I had not been home since the day I left from basic training. I did come home for a little bit after basic training, but then when I flew to Germany, I had been gone for 3 years. So my goal was to take all that leave I saved up and take 30 days of leave before I spend my family back in northeastern Pennsylvania before I headed off to my next duty station. With the intent to just do that, go home, say hi to my friends, spend some time with my family. And that PCS stop was probably the turning point of my life. I went home and reunited with my wife, who I knew growing up, and we decided within a week to get married.
So this is a high school sweetheart.
Well, not really, because
Okay.
she was a few years older than me, but she was my best friend's older sister.
Excellent. Excellent. And SMA, you've mentioned several times now the positive, strong leadership that you received from your leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And you've also commented about teams, being part of a team. So would you share a little bit, please, about how being a part of a team has been important to you personally in being a soldier and just growing as a person? Tell us a little bit more about the leadership that you received, what traits you really made an impression on you. You have said positive, strong leadership, but also the value of being part of a team. How has that impacted your life as well as your career?
Yeah, the easiest way I can describe it is, when you have brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, aunts, uncles, and cousins, you have a bond that's unbreakable. And it's not necessarily due to genetics or blood. It's because of things you do throughout life together. It's the ups and downs, the fights, the makeups, the laughs, the cries, the smiles, the hardships, the trials and tribulations, the wins, right? That's what happens every day in an effective team in the Army. There's challenges, and you go at those together. There's tough days, there's hard days, and there's great days, and there's victories. You laugh, you smile, you cry, you fight, you make up, and that's the importance of the bond that exists and that is created within the military structure that is unlike any other in the world. And it's why veterans bond together for the rest of their lives, especially those who share the experience of going to combat together. It is critical, absolutely critical to the success of what we do every day. And I can tell you, in 30 years, not only I only had one advantage over, I think, anybody else that served, and probably not an advantage, but I had one up. I never had a bad leader. I was fortunate. I had these incredible leaders from the time I was a private till the time that I retired as a sergeant major of the Army, who taught me how to do things right through hard work and dedication. They also taught me it doesn't matter who you are, where you came from, what culture, what religion, what your political views are, as long as you're willing to work hard and treat your fellow peers like equals, and be part of an effective team, you will be successful, and it will stick out. And to remain humble. So I think there's no other place that I think I realized after a few years of doing that, after that first enlistment, that I wanted to be as a result of the community that I was within. What men and women along my left and right were willing to do for me, even though I wasn't related to them, even though I didn't share the same blood or the same genetic path. They were willing to do things for me just like I was their brother or their sister.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. And you said that completing primary leadership about PLDC and going on to Fort Riley and going home, and that was a turning point in your life. So you got married, and so would you share with us a little bit about being married in the Army, being part of the Army family, having your family, and then being part of the Army family, and what it was like to serve? How did that go for you, please?
Yeah. First of all, I married the most wonderful person in the world, and I wouldn't have been successful without her and my continued service. Families are critical to our success, absolutely critical. And I mean, that's not a cliche, that's critical. We enlist soldiers, we retain families in the Army. And we want what every other American wants for our soldiers, and that is, a chance at the American dream, to prosper, be happy and healthy, to raise a family, and then do the things necessary to give the next generation a better chance than us. So that's why it's so critical, and that's why the investments in families. But I was blessed in the fact that from the very beginning, my wife was truly vested in military, even though she knew nothing about it. She was just as ignorant as I was when I first joined the Army about military service, but she was committed to it from day one. We grabbed the U-Haul, moved all of her stuff to Fort Riley, Kansas. I took her to the center of America, literally the center of America. And we had a wonderful first tour together at Fort Riley, Kansas. And my wife gave birth to our son. And I realized at that point that this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I mean, obviously I was a man, I had to provide for my family. Obviously I had a child now, and there was the responsibilities that inherently I had to undertake as a result of making those decisions in my life. But I knew that my family and my wife were going to support that, and I knew that the Army was going to create opportunities not just for me, but for my wife and my son in the future.
That's a wonderful story. Thank you. And so now continuing on at Fort Riley, and you're now a sergeant. Tell us a little bit about your experiences being a leader in the Army now. I mean, you had leadership opportunities before, but now as a sergeant, you really have responsibilities for the care, well-being of soldiers reporting to you. So share with us a little about that and the training regimen that you set up and what training was like, and some of the experiences you had moving forward there, please.
Yep. So I arrived at Fort Riley, Kansas as a sergeant. I had about a year under my belt as a team leader. And again, I was fortunate enough to be placed into a platoon that had an incredible platoon sergeant, Sergeant First Class Shipley. Again, an inspirational leader that taught us to advance ourselves. It was all about family and team. I remember at that time, as as a small unit, we used to do everything together: families, kids, everything. And that's the point where I was taught that this is a family endeavor, and that if you treat your squad leaders, platoon sergeants, appropriately, obviously there's discipline and structure in the military, but you include them in things like that. There's no difference than your family back home. I had an incredible second tour, Fort Riley, Kansas. I was quickly promoted to the rank of staff sergeant. I went to Bradley Master School. I graduated as a distinguished honor grad, again from Bradley Master Gunner School. I was inducted into the Audie Murphy Club, and I took on the role as a section leader within my platoon. And I had a very strict training regimen. Physical fitness was at the top of my priority list, and I learned that from my first unit, Staff Sergeant Davis. Soldiers in my squad knew that PT is going to be a tough endeavor, because I always believed that was an opportunity to bond like no other. Shared pain and misery, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, but it's a way you bond an organization and successes, right? So, if you're working hard every day and it's tough and realistic, and then the fruits of your labor become the result when all of your squad maxes their PT test, the expressions on those young soldiers' faces when they've accomplished something like that together is irreplaceable, and it's unmeasurable in pride as a leader. As a Bradley Master Gunner, I was a meticulous trainer as well. When we did marksmanship and gunnery training, my goal was to maintain a level of proficiency that I knew would pay off if we ever had to deploy to combat. My soldiers' life depended on it, and that's the way I took on the responsibility as a young leader. I was very aggressive, probably a little bit more cocky back then, not in a negative sense, but I was very competitive, not in a negative sense either. But that's the way I was raised: is work hard, instill a sense of pride in your organization, build a team that's capable and confident. And if you can do that, which I was taught by the great leaders that I had up to that point, your soldiers would do anything for you. And I made them an integral part of my family. I remember as a young staff sergeant, on Thanksgiving Day, all my soldiers and their families were at our house eating Thanksgiving dinner. Unless they had somewhere to go or go home on vacation. We always included them as a family too. So we trained hard at work every day. We had discipline and standards. Staff Sergeant Dailey was the boss, but we also celebrated together as a family.
Thank you for sharing. And then what came next after your staff sergeant, Fort Riley? What came next, please?
Yeah, so then I got the orders that most people don't want. I got the orders to Korea, which is a unaccompanied tour to Korea. So my wife and just newly born son remained at Fort Riley, Kansas, and I shipped off to Korea. And also turned out to be a very influential part of my life. The unit I was assigned to was 2-7 Infantry. We were stationed at Camp Casey, Korea, which is very close to the DMZ. I remember spending almost the whole year out in the field or on the DMZ, because we had rotational time that we had to watch the DMZ up there. The entire unit was there without family, so that was hard. I mean, it is hard to be separated for a year at a time, but there was a sense of focus on what we had to do. The realization that we could be in a conflict at any moment was very prevalent within the organization. And not in a negative sense, not in a fearful sense, but a sense of we need to be ready in case that happens. And again, I had inspirational leaders. My company commander at the time, who I was a mentor to me while I was there, is now a 3-star general. My battalion commander retired as a 4-star general. My company first sergeant retired as a very senior sergeant major. Very great leader. Just a unit full of great leaders. And that was, again, by chance. I fell into that unit and spent a lot of time. And that year went by quick because of how much time we spent doing what we were doing. And I remember the soldiers never being unhappy about the fact, that's the old saying goes, if you keep soldiers highly engaged in the skillful craft that they execute, they'll be motivated to do those things. So that was also a great tour. And it's also the time that I found out I made Sergeant First Class towards the end of my tour there. And I was going to be off to be a platoon sergeant next when I PCS'd. Mhm.
And would you share with us a little bit about how the Army family took care of your family while you were deployed?
Absolutely. Yeah, as I said previously, I was blessed to have a spouse that was fully engaged in the FRG, and she did that immediately within the organization I was in, and then later on took very senior responsibilities for those things. And we can talk about that when I started deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan. I was comforted by the fact because there was a support network back at Fort Riley, Kansas. Even though I was no longer in that unit, she was embraced by the families within that organization. I mean, anytime she needed help with our son, because she was a single mother at the time, because I was deployed, she could pick up the phone. Anytime she needed, just some time to spend with the other families, she was always welcome. So even though I had left the unit, that bond still existed between my wife and the families of the unit I served in previously. She was very much welcome. It's also the first time she started working as a GS employee um, at Fort Riley, Kansas, too. So she took on a role as a full-time worker and then also a full-time mother in the absence of a husband for 12 months. Yes.
So thank you for sharing. That's a great example. You're deployed forward, serving the nation in a very challenging location, and the Army at Fort Riley, the Army found in Fort Riley, embraced your family,
Mm-hmm.
so that everyone was able to I guess move forward together.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. So, and then you mentioned Iraq and Afghanistan. So, and you're recently promoted to Sergeant First Class. So, please continue on. And what came next, please?
Yeah, I received orders to Fort Stewart, Georgia, in the cotton balers. I have to correction. I'm sorry. I was assigned to 2-9 Infantry in Korea.
Okay.
2-7 Infantry was the next unit I was assigned
Yes.
to. So I arrived at Fort Stewart, Georgia. I was a newly promoted Sergeant First Class, brand new, and I was at reception station, and I was going to 1st Brigade and 2-7 Infantry. And during reception, another Sergeant First Class who worked at the reception station walked up to me and said, hey, you have a 300 PT score, which was the max PT score you could achieve that time. Expert Infantry badge, you're a Master Gunner. He goes, I'm reading your file here. I said, yeah. He goes, okay, thank you. He walked away. The very next morning, I had to go see the Division Sergeant Major. So this is not something you want to do as a young Sergeant First Class. I had no reason why I was going to see the Division Sergeant Major on my second day at Fort Stewart, Georgia. I'm still in reception at this time, had not met any members of my unit. I go to the Division Sergeant Major's office first thing in the morning. I sit outside, wait to be called in. He calls me in. I stand at parade rest, and he has my personnel file on his desk. And because I had turned it into reception when I PCS'd in. And I was scared. I'm like, I don't know why I'm here. And he looked at me, he said, you have a pretty impressive record here, Sergeant Dailey. I said, thank you, Sergeant Major. He says, where are you headed? I said, I believe 1st Brigade, 2-7 Infantry. And he said, he goes, what do you think about going to my NCO Academy? And I said, oh, no, Sergeant Major, that's not me. I'm a Bradley Master Gunner. I'm infantry. I said, that's not something. He goes, no, I didn't ask you what you wanted to do. I asked you what you thought about it. So the next morning I was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division NCO Academy as a senior instructor, which I thought at that time was going to be detrimental to my career, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
My peers, were all continuing to do combat arms, and as an infantry soldier, I was very comfortable with what I was doing. I was very, not to be boastful, I was very good and proficient at training my soldiers. Very good at proficient training them how to maneuver and fire Bradley in a Bradley squad and a team. And I was excited about being a platoon sergeant. I'd been mentored by some of the best platoon sergeants the Army had to offer, and now it was going to be my opportunity to run a Bradley platoon, which is a big deal. It's a very big deal.
Yes.
And I was a little worried. I remember going home and talking to my wife, and my wife was always the calm, comforting person that said, she'd say, honey, it doesn't matter where you go. It's a matter of how well you do. So if the Army says they need you out there to train the future NCOs of the Army, then that's what you need to do, which turned out to be an eye-opening experience for me. Obviously, went to instructor school, had an incredible year tour out there with the promise from the Division Sergeant Major that if I got the academy accredited, because they were up for accreditation, that I could pick my assignment within the brigade or the division. So I did. Went out there. I learned so much from my instructors who were seasoned, that were already working there. Again, my first sergeant from Korea had followed me, and he was the deputy commandant. So he was there. He got a similar situation, came to Fort Stewart and got placed into the Sergeant Major Academy by the Division Sergeant Major. And it was a very rewarding experience, much different from the combat role that I played as an infantry soldier, but very rewarding, because I could see shortly after I got there the value of educating the future non-commissioned officer of our Army. So my year was up. We did get accredited on our first assessment, and the Division Sergeant Major stayed true to his word and allowed me to go down the 2-7 Infantry, where I got to take over my platoon. But the other opportunity I got when I went to Sergeant Major Academy, which I would not have gotten if I went straight to 2-7 Infantry, was I got to go to Ranger School. Because although I was promoted, I had not been to ANOC yet because I was in Korea.
Okay.
So back then, there was a program that if you stayed at Fort Benning and for Ranger School, they would the Department of the Army would pay for the Ranger School class, and my commandant afforded me the opportunity. And with some hard work, determination, and the graces of God, I made it through Ranger School, and so now I got to come back down to be a platoon sergeant. I was an infantry qualified expert infantry guy with a Ranger tab and a Bradley Master Gunner, and had a very successful tour as a platoon sergeant at Fort Stewart, Georgia.
And clearly, Ranger School was an important accomplishment to you, and clearly it was challenging. How was that? Because at this point in your career, you've accomplished other important goals, such as being a Bradley Master Gunner. But tell us a little more about how Ranger School was special to you as a soldier.
Yeah, and every Ranger can acknowledge Ranger School made me learn more about myself than any other opportunity I experienced in my life. I was very physically fit. I wasn't worried about that at all. I was worried about the caloric deprivation, the sleep deprivation. I did go as a winter, October, November, December, some of the cold and the exposure. But I was also seasoned. I was a sergeant first class, which is unusual at Ranger School. I was one of the oldest guys in the class. But like I said, one of the most fit. I won the PT test. I won the buddy run. I was very physically fit at the time, and so physical challenges weren't my issue concern. But that doesn't make Ranger School easy. There are mental, physical, and emotional challenges that help you experience what you can endure. And not only that, you have to quickly build an effective team in a very small amount of time in order to be successful, because nobody gets through Ranger School by themselves, period. That's not how it works. I'm not saying that people are helping you get through Ranger School, but you have to be able to build an effective team, especially when you're placed in a leadership position, which everyone will be at some time within Ranger School. And it really changed my outlook on life, the importance of furthering the education of my soldiers and instilling to them discipline and standards in combat, not just in garrison, but in combat. And the little meticulous things in life is what's going to keep my soldiers alive on the battlefield. It was one of the proudest moments of my life, other than the birth of my son, which is probably the proudest moment of my life. And I think that's the same experience that's shared with most people who graduate from Ranger School. And I wouldn't go back. I don't think I'd go back now. But I think the fear of not making it is probably the biggest fear that you have to overcome every day. And once you put yourself at ease and you're in Ranger camp and you just say, you know what, tomorrow is going to be a better day, because not every day is the shiniest, brightest day at Ranger School. It helps you with your emotional and spiritual journey to get through that. But it was an incredible experience for me that I will never forget, and something that molded me into the person I am today.
Thank you for sharing. And so you're Ranger qualified, Master Gunner qualified, and Sergeant First Class. So what came next then for you?
Yeah, so really honed my craft as a platoon sergeant. I felt very capable and confident in doing that. like I said, I spent 4 years at Fort Stewart, 1 at the NCO Academy, and 3 as a platoon sergeant. Served as a platoon leader for a good portion of that time because we were short on lieutenants at the time in the Army, and had several rotations to the National Training Center. One top platoon in the battalion for 2 years in a row as a result of the training and maintenance that we did in that battalion, and because of what I was taught as a young squad leader and the effectiveness of being a good platoon sergeant and the payoff of that. And then I got orders again. So to PCS, to Fort Carson, Colorado, which was not unique. Typically you don't go stateside to stateside. I thought with my potential, and I didn't really know what was in store for me at that time. I was branch qualified as a platoon sergeant. I had several years. I had done a broadening assignment. I was very young. I had been promoted very young up to this point. I made E4 in like 15 months, E5 in 19, E6 in 4 years, I think, E7 in 7 years. So I thought, all right, I'm just going to go out to Fort Carson and be a platoon sergeant again. I mean, which was fine. We loaded up the family truckster and we crossed the country, and in that time period, because I did not know, again, we were digital communications at the time was prevalent, but I didn't even own a computer at that point. I mean, it's just wasn't a thing.
Right.
We didn't have cell phones. I mean, they existed at that point, but I had a family, and it wasn't a priority for me. And then shortly after I arrived at Fort Carson, Colorado, I was assigned to a unit, 112 Infantry, and I was only in the platoon for a month as platoon sergeant, and I made the 8 list, which was completely surprising to me because I just barely met the eligibility criteria for the cutoff to be eligible to be looked at that year. And I did not know that I was the only Sergeant First Class infantry guy on Fort Carson that made the 8 list that year.
And you'd been there only a month.
So I got called to the brigade commander's office because I'd also made another career decision. I was going to be a physician's assistant, and I had put in a physician's assistant packet just as an opportunity to broaden my capabilities in life. Still wanted to serve, but I wanted to start pursuing an education. And when I got called to the brigade commander's office, he informed me that I made the 8 list, and he said, "But I also know that you have a PA packet in. I think that," he said, I'm not deterring you from that opportunity." He goes, "But you are an incredible non-commissioned officer. I need several first sergeants. I really think that you should continue on in this endeavor because I think you're going to be incredibly successful as an NCO." So I did. I declined my PA pack at that time. It didn't go through. And the next day, I remember literally the next day, I took over a company in the sister battalion, 1/8 Infantry. And that unit defined myself as an organizational leader, I think. I spent many, many years in that unit because shortly after I was assigned there, 9/11 happened.
And so then did you, with 9/11 occurring, and then how long was it before you deployed in service to the nation?
Yeah. Kind of a little drawn out story. I remember the day 9/11, I was on range 109 on Fort Carson, Colorado. I was a first sergeant this time, but I was a Bradley master gunner, and we were doing Bradley gunnery. So I was in the tower helping the master gunner, do range operations because that's what you do. You run the entire gunnery program. It was early in the morning, and the news came on, and the airplane had attacked, and America knows the rest of the story. I knew from that point that life was going to be a little bit different. We were immediately dispatched to key locations around the United States to protect infrastructure that some was classified. So immediately we came back out of the field, and we deployed platoons all across the battalion to secure key infrastructure, and we did that for several months. Of course, at this time, previous to this, bases were open. We locked down all the bases, closed them, and took on security roles that we had never done in the past. And there was talk at that time, but it wasn't until a little bit later when the thought and realization that a deployment was coming was intimate. And then when the buildup to Operation Iraqi Freedom started, where we were going to invade Iraq, the original plan was a dual-headed attack of the 3rd Infantry Division from the south and the 4th Infantry Division to go through Turkey and attack from the north. We spent an immense amount of time training for this, preparing for it, loading our equipment, putting it on ships. Those ships were headed to the Mediterranean and Middle East. And we were waiting every day with bags packed and our soldiers on literally a 2-hour recall for the word. But unfortunately, history will tell you that Turkey denied our entry through their country, which caused a little bit of problems for us. This is the 4th Infantry Division, but the 3rd Infantry Division decided to move forward, and the boats that had all of our equipment and a few of my soldiers on it had to head back down to the ports of Kuwait in order to offload of our equipment. And then we rapidly deployed to switch gears from deploying to Turkey to Kuwait to start our endeavors in Operation Iraqi Freedom.
And tell us a little bit about your deployment and your combat operations, the pursuit from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, not knowing at the time, this was the first of 4 back-to-back deployments for myself and in that battalion, in that division. So 3rd ID had reached Baghdad. We didn't have much time to download equipment and stage and prepare. I mean, it was, to say the least, the most hasty operations order on the ground that I've ever had, especially preparing for live combat. Our goal at that point was to get as much combat power to South Baghdad as we possibly could within 24 hours. Literally moving things off the boat, staging equipment, and getting there as fast as we can. And then the plan was to push through 3rd ID, who basically culminated because of security reasons. They were still spread out and trying to secure Baghdad and the outer regions at that time, and continue the attack north through northern Iraq to secure key sites. And we knew what those sites were because we had trained for them, but we were going to attack from the north, the south. Right. So now we were going to have to go all the way from south to north. So we did that. I remember soldiers did an incredible job. I mean, just amazing. We reached Baghdad within the 24-hour time period that we were given from the time that we had downloaded equipment in Kuwait, and then made the pursuit north. Saddam's hometown was the first destination that my unit, my battalion, my company were given, and we rolled into Saddam's hometown and started securing and doing coin operations throughout the city, looking for counterinsurgent. Well, at this point, it was still Iraqi army,
right?
Still Iraqi army, and securing key sites to stop the pilfering and looting of munitions, key infrastructure, government facilities, all those kind of things. Yeah.
And would you tell us a little bit about how the training that you had done back at Fort Carson, and then what you were able to do while you was in transit? How did the training, though, the individual training, the unit training, really helped you to be successful in this very hasty operation to enter into Iraq?
Yeah. When we knew we were going to deploy, we immediately focused on mounted maneuvers, because we knew we were going to have to give our vehicles up pretty quickly for them to be shipped to Texas and then put on a boat and go to Turkey. So we spent an incredible amount of time in a very short amount of time brushing up on our gunnery skills, our fire maneuver skills, integration of mounted and dismounted infantry. Then very rapidly we had to load that equipment, and it was gone. So then we focused on individual skills heavily all the way up until the day. Even though we were on 2-hour recalls, we were still using the opportunity on a daily basis for weapons marksmanship, individual squad and platoon movement, ground movements, rehearsing battle drills on map, digital battle drills, doing terrain assessments, looking at routes through Turkey, how we're going to get through North Korea. And then there was additional skills that we didn't know we had to do until we had specialists come out. And one of our missions, I remember, was to secure the northern oil fields and the GOS, the gas and oil storage facilities or storage sites. And I remember these oil specialists coming to Fort Carson before we deployed and teaching us, bringing us all these tools to turn off valves and teaching us how to do these things, because we didn't want to see what happened in Desert Storm happen in northern Iraq. It wasn't about us taking the oil; it was about us preserving it for the people after the fight. And we knew that, you know, if Saddam had done those things in Kuwait when he left, he most likely would do the same thing in northern Iraq if he retrograded as we attacked in. So, so we did a lot of additional training like that, secure key sites, how to get into those facilities, how to identify the key infrastructure and know where to turn valves off in refining facilities, which was very interesting at the time. But if you're the first people on the ground and it's critical, then we got to train infantry soldiers to do those tasks. So yeah, I spent a lot of time training on obviously honing the skills for my soldiers to be as effective they were in combat, but also some of the intangible things that we needed to be effective in nation rebuilding in the future.
And did your soldiers embrace the training?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I never once had to. I was blessed. I mean, I said I was blessed with good leaders. I was more blessed, if that's a correct term. I was with great soldiers. I think it was because the way I was taught to lead. I never had problems in my unit. Of course, you know, the kids get in trouble here
Sure.
or there, or you get into a fight, or you know. But no, I've never had a racial problem. I've never had a sexual assault problem. I've never. It was never anything like that. That they were brothers that would die for each other and do anything, almost to the point of their. You know, when we were in garrison, they'd go out together. Somebody said something bad to one of my soldiers. They had to deal with 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 of them, which is a good thing too. So,
like a family.
it's a family, and they were fueled by achievement together. And when they knew we were deploying, it just got stronger. And the sense of urgency to hone their skills got stronger. Because they knew it was going to be critical to the team's success and their success.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. And tell us about your experiences in Sadr City, if you would, please.
Yeah, so first deployment, we did secure northern Iraq. My unit had went up pretty far close to the Turkish border and then back down, and we settled in a place called Southern Saladin Province, and then spent the rest of that tour really trying to defeat a counterinsurgency, right? And history will tell you that it was an uprising of the people, and then at that time, the Sunni Shia fight just started between the religious factions, the largest religious factions in Iraq. And then we found out we were being extended, so we got extended to a 12-month tour, and then we were replaced, and we came back to Fort Carson, Colorado. And then I found out that I got accepted to the Sergeant Major Academy. So I went to the United States Army Sergeant Major Academy and graduated. And I originally was headed to the 82nd Airborne. I had orders to the 82nd Airborne from the Sergeant Major Academy. There was an oversight by HRC because I was a Master Gunner Ranger, and that's the skill identifiers I had in my record. They thought I was airborne. I was not. So, because I was a mechanized soldier.
Right.
So literally the day of graduation, I got my company Sergeant Major. Back then we were broken down in the company Sergeant Major Academy. Handed me orders to Fort Carson, Colorado, the same exact unit I just came back from after we had sold our house in PCS to Fort Bliss, Texas. We moved right back there, and I took over the same battalion that I was the company and HHC First Sergeant in. And went back to Iraq just like 2 or 3 months after I arrived, and back to the same Providence that we left, and we were rip-towed with, replaced in theater with. So we went back to the exact same location, Southern Saladin Province, and I changed out with the unit that was there, and I did a a 15-month tour. At that time, we were scheduled for a 12-month tour, and then we got extended. Again, spent that entire tour. This is now the Sunni Shia uprising was very, very strong. There was, thoughts, at least perceptions of, internal civil war at that period. The insurgency had grown in capability. External influence had grown from Syria, Iran, and those actors were deeply within the country. And the threats were increasing on a daily basis from sniper fire, IEDs, or even armed militia groups at that time. So we spent a good time, and my unit did a great time defending Balad Air Base, which was in our sector.
Yes.
And about 900 square kilometers around that. We redeployed from that unit. We had, unfortunately, several losses in that organization as a result of the fights that we got into. I came back, and then shortly after, I was promoted to become the brigade sergeant major for the same brigade that I was in previously. And then spent about 12 months, or 11 months only, training the brigade to take them back to Iraq for a third tour. And this is when the counterinsurgency fight was very strong in Iraq at this time. When we left, you could see it escalating, and it had escalated to a point of that we had to continue to grow forces in Iraq. That's why we got cut back to 11-month tour. We were actually supposed to go to Afghanistan as a unit, but it got switched because of our knowledge and skill that we had attained over 2 consecutive tours previously there. And for the rotational pattern, we had to go in a month early to relieve a unit of the 82nd Airborne who were positioned just outside Sadr City in Baghdad.
And you mentioned that you relieved the 82nd Airborne. So did you go over this time as a mechanized unit? Did you have your Bradleys with you?
We did.
Okay.
But not with the intent, though, to use them. The intent was to store them on a military base just north of Baghdad, which we did initially. And we were going to use up-armored vehicles within the city, obviously, because tracked vehicles are very effective in the city, but they also are very destructive to a city, and they're very disruptive to a city, right? Yes. This is the point where we're trying to rebuild and build an alliance between the people of Iraq to hand it back and rebuild the nation and ease the tensions between the Sunni and the Shia uprising. So the plan was, we're going to take our combat equipment because, you have to be forward in case there's any fight that's necessary to do that. But initially, we were replacing the 82nd Airborne, who had a fleet of combat vehicles so they could maneuver within the city and not do the same, be effective, but not cause the same type of damage or disruption within the city. So shortly after we relieved them is when the Jaysh al-Mahdi, a group within Sadr City, started firing rockets into the green zone in Baghdad. The green zone is a place where the Iraqi government was held, the U.S. Embassy is held, and the Iraqi military is headquartered, obviously central to the governance of Iraq.
Yes.
And it was pretty aggressive attacks. And previous to us being assigned to that area, we had not been in what is called Sadr City proper. It's about 2.5 million inhabitants on the east side of Baghdad, named Sadr City after Muqtada al-Sadr,
yes.
From Iran. And so we hadn't been in there in years because previously a unit had gone in there and suffered a significant amount of casualties. So there were several years where nobody had been inside there. So the insurgents had quite a bit of time to build up a stockpile of munitions and capability.
And this is another example of American ingenuity, soldier ingenuity, and the value of your training that allowed your unit to be able to make a transition from your normal fighting vehicles to the equipment that the 82nd had used based on the dictates of the terrain, so to speak.
Yeah, but we did have to immediately, as soon as we got the order to go into Sadr City, we immediately drew our equipment from the base that we had staged north of Baghdad and went back to up-armored track vehicles, M1 Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles.
And then what came next? So this, you dealt with Sadr City, and then what came next?
So we finished the Battle of Sadr City. That's called, in history, I believe, now called the tipping point, where you see the Shia and Sunni uprising start to calm down. Lots of strides are being made within the country. After we took Sadr City and basically destroyed the JS al-Mahdi, you could see Iraq rebuilding. I mean, we still had insurgency attacks. You know, they were trying to counter our initiatives. You know, every time we'd build electrical grid, they'd do something to damage it, but we would quickly rebuild it. And you could see the turning of the tides, right? So, and you could see that a drawdown was in the near future. We started handing security off in the area. And that was the last mission we had, was to help rebuild Sadr City, because we had done obviously a significant amount of damage in there during the battle for Sadr City, which was amazing, with very low civilian casualty rates, but very effective against the enemy. And we did what I believe is an incredible job helping the State Department rebuild that, and then set in place security measures for the Iraqis to slowly take back control of security within the city and the Green Zone. We handed it off during my tenure there. And then again, that was a 15-month tour because we were extended. We were redeployed back to Fort Carson, Colorado. Again, I found myself being promoted. I got selected to be the 4th Infantry Division Sergeant Major, and then went back to Iraq again for my 4th consecutive tour as a Division Sergeant Major, with General Perkins as Division Commander in USD North, Iraq.
And I think this General Perkins had been with 3rd Infantry Division earlier in the Iraqi conflict.
Yeah, he served on a Thunder Run with a lot of experience.
Yes.
Did other tours over there as well. Very experienced commander. And the battle space we'd owned at this time was Turkey to Baghdad to Turkey and Syria to Iran. So a very large amount of battle space. And our mission at that last tour was, at this point, we had pretty much crushed the insurgency, was to train the Iraqi army and build their capabilities to defend, not only secure internal to Iraq, but be able to defend themselves of exterior threats.
As you look back upon your combat deployments and reflect upon those, are there any particular acts of bravery and courage that you saw? We know you saw them, but could you share with us any particular acts of bravery and courage that you could share with us?
Yeah, every single day I was in awe. You know, there's probably somewhat of a misperception about combat, where, you know, leaders have to encourage their soldiers to fight. I never experienced that. It was exactly the opposite. My soldiers would charge to the sound of the guns, and our job was to keep them restrained and do it with, you know, precision. And never once did I ever experience a soldier that wasn't willing to do that or give their lives. There's countless acts of heroism I had to witness. I think one of the most incredible that was probably under-recognized at the time was the night we had to go into Sadr City. Again, this is an area that's only a few city blocks square that had 2.5 million inhabitants, 35 occupants per building, per house, that we knew had an incredible stockpile of munitions and weapons that had been built over several years of us not being able to go in there, and support from Iran and other countries. So we made a decision to go draw our combat vehicles, our M1 tanks and Bradleys, and we were going to punch down the center of the city, literally just punch down the center of the city. And at that time, very dangerous munitions were being built by the enemy, a thing called EFP, so explosively formed projectiles that could breach tanks, could breach Bradleys, and they're very dangerous. So we had to basically do a deliberate breach down the center of the city, just like we were trained for years, but not out in the desert or not in a minefield, but through the city. And the lead vehicle, and I forget the nomenclature, we used to call it the Spider. It had a V-shaped hull. It was a single occupant vehicle, and it had mine detection equipment front and back, so it could scan that. And it would go forward, even forward of the EOD or the tanks that we'd have, to hopefully identify any explosives prior to them being there. And then if they found them, the team would deal with them, and then they would continue to move forward. So this young man, before he got in that night, I was at the rehearsals. We talked to him, and obviously he could communicate in there, but we also had visual signals in case of loss of communication. And I was a few vehicles back in this convoy with the casualty evacs folks. I was a sergeant major at the time. And it was shortly after he entered into Sadr City when the first EFP hit the vehicle. And he comes over the radio and says, "I'm good to go, I'm moving forward." So he continues to push forward. Very shortly after that, the second EFP hit him. Significant damage to the vehicle, took out the communications, but he held up the green chem light. That was a signal to keep going. And he kept going. Just a few more meters down the road, a third EFP hit the vehicle. Significant damage at this time. There was a long pause, and when I say an EFP, it rocked the entire vehicle, huge explosion, and there's time for it to clear. This isn't something that, and you could feel it several vehicles back, pretty significantly. It's a long pause, and then the green Ken light comes up, and this thing is a four-wheel drive vehicle. At least one of the drives was out at this time, but it could still move forward, and he decided, I'm going to continue to move forward. He gets down about halfway, gets hit again for the fourth time with an EFP. At that point, I thought there's no way this vehicle can continue to go. Long pause, the explosion clears, the green chem light goes up. He gets down about 3/4 of the way. We had planned to punch halfway through the city. Gets 3/4 to that, gets hit a fifth time with an EFP. Direct hit to the vehicle. And the red chem light comes up. So we moved the other tanks and mine clearing vehicles around it. We clear forward to where we're going to point. It was a little bit of time before we get in there and get him, obviously, because of very, very, very touchy situation. We were doing a very hasty clearing, so the tanks and Bradleys took over, basically firing canister rounds down just to clear any munitions that are on the ground. We get up there to evac him. We get him out. He got hit through the vehicle. The EFP had penetrated the vehicle and hit him in the buttocks, but he was going to be okay. They flew him over to the cache. We got done with the battle that night. I drove over to the cache and went to the hospital to see him. There's a picture on the internet of me putting my hand on his head, and I said, "What were you doing?" He said, "Accomplishing the mission, Sergeant."
Excellent.
You can't pay for that. It's not for sale, and you don't understand why people do those things, but he just kept going. He didn't get a Medal of Honor. I think we gave him a Bronze Star with Valor, but he was critical to the success of the entire organization. Had every good reason to stop, and none of us would have felt anything other than the fact that, oh my God, you went this far after the first or second EFP, but continued to go all the way to the end, getting that. He was literally dragging that vehicle as far as it would possibly go. And he said the only reason why he stopped is because the vehicle wouldn't go and drive anymore. So he was going to continue to fight. He said, I didn't put the red chem light up because I got hit. I put it up because the vehicle wouldn't move anymore.
What a great example of the American soldier.
Yeah.
Courage,
your
heroism,
average American
persistence.
soldier.
Yes,
and they're all awesome. And every
Yes.
one of them, they all have that capability.
yes. Thank you for sharing, Sergeant Major.
Yeah.
So what came next then for you?
Uh,
Your division's
So
command Sergeant Major.
another great tour as a division CSM and as back in Fort Carson and over in Iraq. I had somehow made a name for myself now in the Army because I received a call while I was in Iraq during my last tour from the Sergeant Major of the Army's office that said, you need to put your name in to be the TRADOC Sergeant Major. I was not comfortable with that. I was comfortable with warfighting. This is what I had done consecutively for the last 10 years in and out of Iraq as a first sergeant, a battalion sergeant major, a brigade sergeant major, a division sergeant major. And I didn't think that was my future path. But he's a sergeant major of the Army, so you listen, right? So then I wanted to serve. So yeah, but I was apprehensive because I felt that it's not that I didn't want to do it. I just thought I'd be better at something else. Mm-hmm. And the SMAs told me that's the reason why I'm selecting you, because this is what we need in TRADOC right now. I interviewed for that job with General Bob Cohn and was selected for that job. I still had several months left of my tour in Iraq, and I didn't want to leave. And I knew it was at the risk of me losing this job and this opportunity, which is an ACOM in the Army, which there's only a handful. And I asked General Cohn if I could finish my tour with General Perkins, if he would wait for me. And he said yes. So I got to stay in Iraq and finish the tour of my unit. and still keep my future job as the trade ops sergeant major, and call my phone, my wife on the phone that night and say, honey, I got promoted. She goes, congratulations, when are you coming home? I said, not for another few months, but I need you to move to Fort Eustis, Virginia. True story, 100% true story. And just so happens we had a mortar attack while I got on the phone with her. She goes, where's that? I said, I have no idea. Google it. And that's how good of a wife I have. Is I called her from combat, had to basically hang up the phone on her, tell her she's got to move to Fort Stewart, Georgia, which is not an easy thing to do without your service member. So that's,
sure.
power of attorney, get orders, make shipping arrangements, with the movers, and drive across country to a place she's never been. And I have no idea where Fort Eustis, Virginia was at that point. It's the first time I've ever heard of it in my life. And she did it. And so I came back from that tour, and I was assigned as the trade ops sergeant major. I remember getting to that assignment and walking in my office for the first day and having no idea what I was supposed to do. I had been in trade ops years ago as an instructor, but that was just,
Right.
PLDC instructor. And I had spent the last, 10 years in combat, not all 10 years in combat, but going back and forth to combat for 10 years. And I remember myself being scared. And it became one of my leadership tips that if you're not nervous on your first day of school, you're either lying, you don't care, or you're just plain stupid. But nervousness is not a bad thing.
Right.
Realization of it is what makes you stronger if you do the things to counteract your nervousness. So I invested heavily into our training and doctrine, and then figured out that, hey, there's a reason why the Army put me here, and there's a reason why they took a combat arms guy and put him in the training world, so I could use the skills I learned the last 5 years in combat, 10 years of training for it, and integrate them into the future plans of training our non-commissioned officer corps. So that's exactly what I started to do. I set off to rewrite all not me personally, we had an entire team working for me, a wonderful team, but we rewrote all the NCOES curriculum at every level. We added several levels of NCOES, and we started the endeavor of credentialing the United States Army Sergeant Major Academy, the first enlisted academy in the world that was recognized by regional accreditation for a college degree.
Congratulations. Mm-hmm. And as you said, TRADOC, Training and Doctrine Command, this is the Army's command that teaches, trains leadership. And it just strikes me that given all the terrific leaders that you served with in garrison and in combat, and then you went to become the Command Sergeant Major of the Army's Training and Doctrine Command, where leadership is trained. So it's very interesting how the Army works, the infinite wisdom of the Army, as they say.
Yeah. I said the Army's, I don't know, they have this unorthodox way of putting the right people at the right place at the right time. I don't know how. I don't think there's any methodology to it, though. There's no book. I think it just happens.
Right.
Honestly, I think it's the Army builds great leaders who have incredible diversity in their capabilities and skills, and you are taught that. I think the greatest thing about the Army is although we have structure and doctrine and discipline, we always train our soldiers to adapt and overcome regardless of situation. So, and if you give them the intangible skills of determination, leadership, passion, they'll figure it out. You put those leaders anywhere and they'll figure it out. That's why you see many of them successful in society after they retire.
Absolutely.
Or even PCS or ETS out of the Army. So, yeah, I had an incredible tour. And I'll tell you, had I not done that, had I refuted the SMA's directive to go outside my comfort zone, I would have not been set up for success in the greatest challenge I was ever given in the Army, which immediately followed that tour. I learned so much and cured a vast amount of ignorance in myself during that job of the importance of what Training and Doctrine Command does for our Army on a day-to-day basis, from basic training to recruiting, to basic training, to AIT, to officer education and training, from junior RTC to ROTC to West Point. 500,000 people transition their lives through there annually and become excellent soldiers and leaders for our Army. It's a very influential place, and it's important that we put key leaders in there. So I'm blessed to have had that opportunity. And we call it TRADOC the Army School, and I got to go to school there for 5 years. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Mhm.
So tell us about being Sergeant Major of the Army. That's what came next, I
Yeah.
believe. So share with us how being Sergeant Major of the Army impacted you
Yeah.
and what you learned from that opportunity.
Sergeant of the Army. Every childhood soldier's dream. And I don't mean that. I mean, and that should exist, right? I mean,
Right.
everybody dreams, and every soldier should dream of being able to do that, but also with the reality of the incredible impossibility to do
Right.
it. I never thought I was going to be the Sergeant Major of the Army, and I honestly have not tried. It didn't really hit me until I was the TRADOC Sergeant Major that there was a potential for me to be the Sergeant Major of the Army when my commander told me that he was going to submit my name to be the Sergeant Major of the Army. I still thought I had a lot more to do prior to that in order to, well, I didn't even think about it. I don't know. It just kind of, I was in my 5th year as the TRADOC Sergeant Major, very comfortable in what I was doing. And again, I got a call to put my name on the slate to be the Sergeant Major of the Army. And so I did. And my commander recommended me, and I went through the deliberate process of how they select a sergeant major. At the time, there's obviously nominated by a general officer. We do things like physical fitness tests. There was an assessment and a board of senior general officers, and obviously interviews with the chief and the secretary at the time. And then the chief of staff of the Army, they narrowed it down to 5 people. The chief of staff of the Army, once we were complete, called each and every one of those 5 in for a personal interview. And I was at that point, I was ready to accept the fact that I wasn't Sergeant Major of the Army. If I didn't get it, it's no problem. There was great, highly qualified people that were competing to be the Sergeant Major of the Army at the same time as I was. Never did I think I was the best leader in the Army. I do believe I had the best leaders in the Army, but never did I think or claim I was ever the best leader in the Army or the best soldier in the Army. And I remember walking in and reporting to the Chief of Staff of the Army. Now, some time ago, I told you how scared I was when I had to go see a division sergeant major.
Yes.
This is now I did have a lot of experience with briefing the chief as a TRADOC sergeant major because General Odierno was heavily invested into leader development and to include and non-commissioned officer development, and gave me incredible support to do all the things that I said we did to include accrediting the sergeant major academy. He was the key individual that facilitated that process. So I walk in, ready to report just like you taught in basic training, to commanding officer. I walk in, he said, Sergeant Major, sit down. At that point, I thought, okay, it's hey, I appreciate you taking the opportunity to do this, but, I didn't select you. That's not how the conversation started. I sat down on the couch across from General Odierno, for anybody that knew him, a complete gentleman, and an incredible leader. And the right person. The Army is unique in doing this.
Yes.
At the right time to lead our Army. And he started the conversation with, I called your wife this afternoon. And I was like, well, I didn't know this was part of the process. I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, why did you call my wife? And of course I'm not laughing, obviously.
Right.
I'm like, uh-oh, what did my wife tell him? And I said, yes, sir. And he says, and I asked her something. I said, sir? He says, I asked her if you could be the sergeant major of the Army. And then I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, what did she say? And so I said, sir, what did she say? And she said yes. And at this point, I don't know what, I don't know if he's doing this just to ask every spouse whether their spouse, and he goes, and I think that's important, because if you want to be the sergeant major of the Army, I want your spouse to want you to be the sergeant major of the Army. I said, sir, I do too. He goes, so that's why you are.
Wow. Great story.
Yeah, it was incredible, and I've told this story a million times. So, like I said, it's every childhood soldier's dream to be the sergeant major of the Army. The reality is it's very difficult, right? And they all know that. And in that instant, there's this incredible excitement that is completely overwhelming. And that lasts about a microsecond, literally, I mean it. And then this incredible fear bestowed upon me immediately following, the kind that sent that really chill down your back, and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to be the sergeant major of the Army. I just kept thinking back to the day that my son was born. Literally, I'm sitting there talking to the chief, and I'm thinking about literally watching my wife give birth to my son. And on that day, it felt the same way, similar to that, of I need to grow up. I'm a father now. And when they made me sergeant major of the Army, I said, hey, I need to grow up. Having been mature, having been to combat for 5 tours, starting with Desert Storm, I still felt this sense of responsibility that I needed to reach. I needed this level of proficiency that I needed to reach, not out of fear of embarrassing myself, but for the service the soldiers deserve. So, yeah, it's kind of a weird feeling. It's not all balloons and firecrackers. It's humility.
Yes, indeed. Great
Yeah.
story. And share with us, please, perhaps a couple of the highlights and a couple of challenges you experienced as Sergeant Major of the Army.
Yeah. I think every day was a highlight to be the sergeant major of the Army. It was incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible. I traveled the world. I think I went to almost 100 countries, just going to visit our soldiers and seeing the incredible things they do. You get to see more as a sergeant major of the Army than most people in the Army, to include the chief or secretary. I mean, because of the ability of you to travel. And then I was at school as a sergeant major of the Army. I got to work with congressmen and senators and learn legislative process and befriend them and get behind the cameras and see the incredible sacrifices they make, and the things they're exposed to from the public eye. It's just incredible to see the work that they do, and you won't realize it until you go in there and meet them and build a relationship. And I was very passionate about doing that because I knew that was key to my success, and not my personal success, my success in being able to achieve the things we wanted to achieve for our soldiers and their families. I think some of the greatest things I got to work on was in 2017, I testified that we had one of the highest unemployment rates in post-service that we've ever had in the history of our Army. At that time, unemployment compensation, we were paying $1 billion a year for unemployment compensation. And it wasn't the money to me. Obviously, the money's important because now I'm in the level that has to worry about budget. But it was the fact that people weren't hiring our soldiers. These incredibly talented young men and women who I got to work with that did the most inspiring things in the world weren't being hired by our employers out in hometown America. So I invested a lot of time and energy into this, and a lot of analysis and research with the Department of Veterans Affairs, where I placed a fellow, and Department of Labor, where I placed a fellow, Department of Education, where I placed a fellow, in order to get to work directly with these organizations and build trust relationships with them. And came up with a few things. The Army Career Skills Program, which morphed into later the Army the DoD Skill Bridge, and I was very passionate about credentialing and certifications. We had, since 1965, we had federal tuition assistance that our soldiers could take advantage of for college degrees. Institutions that were accredited both nationally and regionally, but they couldn't pursue technical skills and certificates and license, of which many of our enlisted soldiers, that's what they did. Mechanics, right. Airplane mechanics, plumbers, electricians, all those things that would translate to jobs in their post-service. But unfortunately, that military training didn't translate to civilian certification. And so we worked with states and governors, and spent a lot of time getting states to acknowledge military training as credible training towards license or certificates across the states. But it wasn't enough because military trains for military need and civilian trains for rules and regulations to protect people, like codes and others. So I started an initiative to create the Credentialing Assistance Bill, which would be the sister to the Tuition Assistance Bill, and spent a lot of time on the Hill, several months, educating our elected leaders on the value and benefit of doing this. And as a result, with all those initiatives, not just me combined, and getting support from the Secretary of Defense at the time and my Secretary in Chief, I'm proud to say today that the post-unemployment record is the lowest it's been in history, and the service is paying the lowest unemployment rates they've had in that time. And our soldiers are seen as a valuable asset to our communities around the United States. And to me, that's a long-term investment in future enlistment. Because I want young men and women who go to high school to be able to see that there's an opportunity for a guy like me who saw that in his father, who had no high school education, was trained in communications in the Army, went to apply for a job in the 70s where there was a massive amount of unemployment, interest rates were very high, and got accepted because he was a veteran and he was a communications specialist. And that value was seen back then, but somehow faded throughout history. And now we created that opportunity for our service members today to go to those future employers to say, hey, you hire this young man or woman who did this skill in the Army, you're going to get a highly qualified trained individual. And hopefully that will pay dividends in the future and motivate young men and women like me to join the service.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And it's a well, and congratulations on that accomplishment, because it brings the trades up with the college degree opportunities. So, and now you are vice president for soldier and NCO programs at the Association of the United States Army. How did your 30-year career in the Army, learning leadership skills, developing your leadership skills, then help you as you went through the transition from serving in the Army to civilian life? What was that transition like? Was that at all intimidating? And how do you continue to serve in your role as vice president at the Association of the United States Army?
Yeah, I think that people think that when you start in the Army, transition is easy. All I had done since I was a child is be a soldier. I was scared. I was like, wait a minute, I got this thing going on here. It turned out pretty good for me, and the Army's providing for me and my family, and we love the Army. My wife loves the Army. Not only did it allow me to get my degree, my wife got her degree. My son is an aerospace engineer today because of my GI Bill. So it was hard. I remember the day, when the retirement services officer walked to my office in the Pentagon and said, hey, Sergeant Major, we got to fill out your retirement packet. And I was like, man, this is real. Like, I have to leave the Army? This is all I've done since I was literally a child. But I knew that, just like in anything, the nervousness of it will help you drive, the persistency to achieve. And I wasn't worried either. My wife and I had not made a lot of money, obviously, but we had been financially responsible throughout our lives. And I knew that she was willing to stick by my side, and that we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out, even not knowing what we were going to do next. So I just went home for 3 months because I got great advice by my previous commander, General Perkins. He said, listen, you can get a job, but the great job is going to find you. And literally it did. After 3 months of being home and back in my hometown, I got a call from the previous president, CEO, General Carter Ham, asking me to come down and interview for an opportunity to be the vice president of NCO and soldier programs here at AUSA. And I knew of AUSA, obviously. I knew that the Association of the Army, but I was ignorant again to what they really did, so I drove down to the city. I had lunch with General Ham. And I came back, and my wife said, what are you going to do? I said, I took the job. And she said, where are we going to live? And how much are you going to make? I was like, I don't know. I didn't ask. I said, but we'll figure it out. She said, you're right. We'll figure it out. So, and I'll tell you, in the first couple months that I was here, I realized how ignorant I was and what AUSA really does behind the scenes. I went out, start traveling to visit with chapters. And these are volunteers, 122 around the world within 7 regions. And it's incredible. Some of these people live AUSA. When I say live AUSA, they open the trunk of their car. It's full of AUSA stuff. And they didn't just put it there today. It's been there. You could tell, right? And their house, there's a whole room dedicated to AUSA. And they're at events on the installations or within the community like 2 or 3 times a week. And these are the same people as you and me that have families and children and jobs and soccer practice. And and they're willing to donate all this time and a lot of times personal resource to an association for one reason, to help take care of our soldiers and families. And this job has an incredible addiction, just like the one I had previous to this. It's just, you want to come to work every day. When I was a soldier, there wasn't a single day I didn't want to go to work. Even the years I spent in combat, there wasn't a day I didn't want to go to work. And I say all the time, there was very tough days in the Army, but there was never a bad day. I never had a bad day, even in combat. And that's the job I'm in now, because I get to do things. I can't wear a uniform anymore. I guess I'm authorized to. I'm retired. I probably could, but that wouldn't be appropriate. But I do get to still serve, not in the same capacity as a service member, a uniform service member, but do great things for our soldiers, and in some capacities do things that I couldn't do, even when I was a sergeant of the Army, to help our soldiers and families. And it's an addictive job, which also needs to be passed on to a next generation, just like we did in the Army.
Yes.
And I'm blessed to have that opportunity, and I'm glad I listened to the advice of my commander of, hey, just relax. You're going to be okay. You're an infantry soldier. You've dug a foxhole. If you need to dig another one, you'll be fine, right? And he was right. And shortly after that, then they hired my spouse to be the family readiness director for USA as well. And we have a great time coming to work every day, serving for our association and our Army.
Excellent. An opportunity for the whole family to serve.
Yeah.
Sergeant Major Dailey, thank you very much for this discussion in support of the Veterans History Project. And would you please, any closing remarks you would like to offer?
Yeah. I think it's important for the American people to know that service to this nation is important and necessary. We all have the benefits of what we rightly so deserve in this country every single day as a result of great leaders, the forethought of our founding fathers, and the preservation of those who are willing to sacrifice in order to preserve it. I think sometimes we lose sight of the value of service in small communities around the nation. And as the number of veterans decrease in our history, we can't lose that. We need to inspire the next generation to serve. And not everybody has to. Well, let me rephrase that. Every American has a responsibility to serve this country.
Yes.
We only need a few to do it in uniform, but everybody has a responsibility to serve this country. Whether you're a teacher or a doctor or a nurse, or you're just going to work every day and being a hard-working, tax-paying American citizen, I think we all have an opportunity and an obligation to serve. But we do need to inspire the next generation of the value of service in our military, because it will continue to preserve our way of life in the future.
Well said, and thank you. Sergeant Major Dailey, has indeed been a great, excuse me, it has indeed been a great pleasure and honor to interview you for this Veterans History Project. All the best to you, and thank you so much for your many years of service to our nation, serving in uniform and serving in civilian life. Thank you.
Thank you.